I apologize in advance to all the Bucs fans watching this. I know I'm wearing a Saints hoodie, okay? I just didn't feel like changing. So EJ's representing us with the Bucs clothing today.
Mike Allstott, Chicago native.
Who doesn't love Mike Allstott?
Everybody loves Mike Allstott.
Everybody loves Mike Allstott.
If
My
you don't
brother-in-law is
love-
a Bucs fan, by the way. His favorite player ever is Mike Allstott.
If you don't love Mike Allstott, we can't be friends. Let's just put that right out there.
Not Rondé, not Sapp, not Simeon Rice. Like, Mike Allstott
It
is
can
his
be-
favorite Buck ever.
It can be all of those, but come on. A-Train, like, you gotta love him.
Do you think he would be successful in today's NFL?
Ooh, it's a really good question. Yes, he's a hell of a football player.
I think it would depend on the team. Like, Sean McVay, 100%. Because that's what they do, right? We're
Power-based
just running
system,
it down
but
your throat.
Can you see him in the role that the Ravens use Patrick Ricard in?
Oh, God, he'd be way better at it.
Bingo. So,
And I love Patrick Ricard, but
right. So there you go. Yes, Mike Allstott would be successful in any era as long as the coach understood what they had, which is a lot.
for those of you that haven't followed this series, by the way, we're not just going to exclusively talk about the early 2000s Bucks. We are talking about the 2024 Bucks today and a little bit of the 2023 Bucks, but
Just a little bit.
you know, I feel like the Bucks have a very underrated history. People don't talk about it enough, so maybe we should do an episode on like the late 90s, early 2000s Bucks.
Wouldn't be hard.
I mean, how many Hall of Famers do they have on the team? Like
Bunch.
5, 6, something like that. Anyway, not to get too off track. Again, today is Bucks Day. We are officially halfway through this series.
Yes.
This is our final NFC South episode, so we are picking our division winner today as well. We are officially 16 out of 32 teams down as of recording this, so that feels damn good. Next time you see us, or we're going to be down in LA because EJ's coming down for the second half of this home and home.
Oh, it'll be fun. The first half's been extremely fun, and I think the Bucks is a great way to cap it off because they're a fun team, and we have some sneaky stuff that might answer some questions you have about worries you're looking forward to in 2024, things you might think you lost from 2023 that maybe you didn't really lose as much as you thought you did.
Well, that's the thing is they did lose really good coaches, but they also hired really good coaches. So maybe things aren't as dire as maybe we thought back in February. Plus, they nailed the draft.
Yeah.
So it's been a fun offseason for the Bucs. We're going to go over 2023. We'll talk about 2024, all the changes leading into this season, and also our expectations for this team. NFC South, very fun division, ends today. Strap in. Jay, roll the intro. Welcome back to the Bootleg Football Podcast. I'm Brett. That's EJ. Talking Tampa Bay Buccaneers today. Very, very fun team to watch. They weren't the best team in the NFC. They definitely weren't the best team in the NFL, if you count all the AFC teams in there. I don't know where they would rank among AFC teams. But as far as entertainment factor goes, like just did I have fun watching this team in 2023? Easily top 10. I adore watching Bucs games because no matter what, you're going to be entertained. There's going to be flashy plays, some for them, many against them. But all in all, God, they're great television.
Scrappy, competitive, pushing the envelope every week. Again, sometimes it worked out for them, sometimes it didn't, but I would say worked out for them more often than not. And that wasn't necessarily the expectation for them going into the year. And when you have a team like that, you end up just rooting for them because they're doing more with less. And you're like, let's go, guys. Let's see how far we can push it. How good can you actually be?
Plus, they employ Baker Mayfield, who's just one of my favorite quarterbacks in the league. Again, I'm not saying he's the best quarterback or even a top 10 quarterback, but I just love Baker Mayfield. I've always loved Baker Mayfield. I've always rooted for Baker Mayfield. Probably goes back to my dad being an OU fan since the 60s, so I've watched pretty much every game Baker's ever played, from college all the way through the NFL. I have always rooted excessively hard for him. And to see him have the success he did last year under Dave Canales with Idzik and all them, and, get a big deal. I was so happy, man. I was so happy. Like that was really the outcome I rooted the most for last year was just Baker being good and Baker getting back on track. The wins and losses was secondary to me. I know Saints or Bucs fans. Oh, I shouldn't say Saints. I know Bucs fans are like, no. Wins and losses were important.
They matter.
But from an outsider's perspective, I wanted Baker to get back on track, and he did.
And we take a lot of crap on this podcast for being really positive and looking for what players can do and talking about ceilings and best positive outcomes. Look, that's the football that we like, right? We want to see players play to their potential. Are they all going to do it? Of course not. But when one does, especially after having a sort of roller coaster ride like Baker did, it's cool. It's a great story. We love great stories. That's part of the reasons we love football. And watching Baker have this sort of full arc, right? This full movie character arc of high draft pick, early success, up and down, bunch of different teams at this point, to land in a place, to have them understand what he is, to maximize that, for him to get that contract and pay it off. It's a great story, and we love great stories.
And remember, this team was supposed to be, well, we didn't predict for them to finish with the number 1 overall pick, but a lot of people did going into the year. A lot of people thought they were going to be the worst team in the league with a bullet.
Yep.
And yet they won 9 games. And they weren't even the most talented roster. Like when we get into QBS and like what they were supposed to do with the talent on the roster versus where they finished, they overachieved massively.
Yeah, mightily.
Like they were the little engine that could. And I think that was why I rooted for them so much, is because they were supposed to be terrible.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go out and win the damn division. It's a great story.
It's a little bit like Major League, right? I guess we'll just have to win the whole damn thing.
They're fun. Love talking about this team. Before we get into 2023 and recapping what was a very entertaining season, I do want to thank our friends over at Underdog Fantasy for making this entire series happen in the first place. They are our biggest sponsor. We work very closely with them, and also they're just big fans of the show. They sit around and watch all these episodes too. So Nick, Berm, Mackins, all you guys watching this, thank you to you guys for working with us. If you guys already play on Underdog, you already know this, but if you don't play on Underdog, whatever sports you're watching this summer, whether it's hockey or basketball, which is going to be well over by the time this airs, but, maybe you're watching baseball, maybe you're watching golf, maybe racing. I mean, literally anything, you can play along on Underdog while you watch those and, do your pick'ems every single week. They just launched Pick 8, so you can do up to 8 players in your pick'ems, and the payouts are crazy on those. Maybe you're doing season-long pick'ems for the NFL. Those are live right now. Or maybe you're just doing best ball. A lot of people play best ball on Underdog because it's the best ball fantasy platform as well. So if you're doing drafts over the summer, you're getting ready for your home league on Underdog, and you want to try them out, use promo code BOOTLEG. That'll give you up to $250 as a bonus on your deposit. And you're also going to get a free pick'em special in the lobby as well. So lots of goodies if you use promo code BOOTLEG. I would encourage you guys to go to the link down in the description below or use the QR code on the screen. Check them out. And if you want to play, promo code BOOTLEG gets you a bunch of free stuff. So, with that being said, EJ, take it away. Talk about 2023.
A lot of times when we're talking about the 2023 summary, we kind of race through it because it wasn't really fun for teams to relive, certainly not for fans. The Bucs, I feel like this is kind of better than average. It's good times,
right? Man. It's good times.
Yeah, they actually were that good. So 2023 Bucs, overall record 9-8, first in the division. That's probably the biggest deal. For a team predicted to be as poor as they were to win their division, not exactly a worst to first story, but it felt like it, and that was fun. Home record 4-4, road record 5-4, and most importantly, last 5 games 4-1. These are the teams that are good down the stretch. Typically, that success carries over into the next year, so it's a really good omen for 2024. We've got a couple of different numbers to help you sort of add nuance to that performance. First one is called quarterback support. It's a new stat that we came up with this year. I built it with Arjun Menon from PFF a few months ago. There's a link in the description if you want to see exactly how it's made, but basically it's 5 statistics, 3 offensive, a defensive, and a special teams that kind of build the picture of how good should this team have been? Mm-hmm. How well did they set the table for their quarterback to play well? How much support did they provide as an overall organization for their team to succeed? So it's a 0 to 100 rating, 0 being the worst team in the NFL, 100 being the best. The Bucs were a 35.5, and that put them 21st out of 32 teams. Now, that's tickling bottom 10. I understand that. But that's where a lot of national pundits put them before the season. That would be a ranking that matched up with a lot of what a lot of people said before the season. The other number that we have for you is power score, which we introduced you to last year. It's 6 statistics. Rushing offense.
6 statistics. Oh, that one comes out rough, doesn't it?
It's hard, especially after recording a lot of episodes today. Rushing offense, passing offense, rush defense, pass defense, points scored, and points allowed. All we do is assign them their league rank. Where did they finish within the NFL? Were they 15th? Were they 30th? And we add those up, divide them by 6. So rushing offense, the Bucs were 27th. This was one of the areas you alluded to it with the interior offensive line. They struggled. They committed to it, but they struggled. They weren't super efficient. Passing offense, 8th. We were a top 10 passing offense, and that's important in the modern NFL. Rush defense, top 5. They were 5th. Pass defense, 22nd. Not great. That had some to do with injuries, some to do with scheme. We'll talk about that. Points scored, 20th, and points allowed, 7th. So top 10 scoring defense, top 5 rushing defense. There's a lot of things to hang your hat on here. When you add all that up, divide it by 6. Bucs power score is 14.8. Lower is better. Everybody would like to be first in everything. That made them 12th overall. So Tampa had the second largest positive difference between QBS, how well they should have done, and power score, how well they did do. When you said they overachieved, this is the measure of that. They were plus 9. 9 spots better than they should have done. I think that was reflected if you're Tampa Bay fans and you watch these games. Yeah, this was a plucky underdog that, basically said, we could play with anybody. We don't really care what anybody said about us, and came out with a result that was much better than their resources or how they set the table.
That is the differential you get when you have good quarterback play and good coaching, especially offensive coaching with Dave Canales and Idzik. And I mean, Carolina poached half that offensive staff, but for a reason, right?
Is it just half? I thought it was more.
Like bunch of miracle workers over there, yep. Right? And keep in mind, like when you're looking at the Bucs, it's not that they didn't have holes. Like their tackles were really good in pass pro. They were top 4 in terms of pressure rate allowed at the offensive tackle position, both left and right. But their interior was garbage. Like they were absolutely horrible on the interior of the offensive line, whether it was in pass protection or run blocking. Like we're going to talk about Rashad White in a little bit. All of his yards that he got, he might as well have been crawling through razor wire. Like that was a brutal season for him, and he just grinded it out and grinded it out and grinded it out. But there was no room for him, right? And I don't think it was a coaching issue for that. I think it was lack of talent issue, which they addressed in the draft. Like the Graham Barton pick was amazing. But it's not there wasn't holes on the roster. There was plenty of holes on the roster. It's just when you have a coach like Dave Canales and you have a quarterback like Baker Mayfield, they elevated what they had, and they made the most of it, and they won the division because of that. And I think, not to go too much on the Saints in 1 week, but when you look at the Saints, who we talked about yesterday, who from a statistical perspective and from an analytics perspective, they should have been one of the 10 best teams in the NFL, and they missed the playoffs. Well, that's the difference is when you don't have good, or rather when you don't have consistent quarterback play, and your offensive coaching staff pretty much gets completely replaced because they weren't great last year, versus Tampa, where you got Baker Mayfield and a very good offensive coaching staff. Like that's the difference. The Bucs should have been significantly worse than New Orleans, and they won the damn division. Same thing with Atlanta. So much talent, terrible coaching, terrible quarterback play. Like that was the difference in this division. Who had the best quarterback play? Who had the best coaching? That was Tampa. They won it. It matters, folks. It is a coach and quarterback league. Everything else matters too, but those two things matter the most, and I think that's reflected in the difference between their QBS and their power score.
Absolutely. And if you look at power score, all those 6 numbers are not created equal. If you have a well-developed and effective passing offense and you score points, like those are the two in the modern NFL. You cannot be a bottom third passing offense and below average or below half in points scored and expect to do well overall. a sort of old Ravens Super Bowl model of like, oh, we'll just build the most elite defense in the last 20 years and stop anybody from scoring anything. The rules aren't built that way. The NFL is not geared that way. They're not going to call games that way. You need to pass the ball. You need to score points. The Bucs did both of those things well. It patched over a lot of their holes. They had a lot of other holes. Again, pundits weren't stupid before the season saying, this is not the most talented team. They're probably not going to do great. That was a very common, I'd say prevalent perception before the league year started. And instead, they kind of nailed just the 2 high points they needed to maximize that. We talk about maximizers in this series, Canales and Baker, that sort of mind meld that they had. We got to see good Baker way more than we got to see bad Baker. They ended up throwing the ball really well, scoring a bunch of points, and overachieving because of it.
Well, why don't we talk about what that offensive staff did with Baker and all these guys, right? And kind of building an offense around a really bad interior offensive line trio. Well, Malk was okay. Malk was fine. It's really left guard and center that were like the two biggest
miss
things.
Ryan Jensen.
Now that they got Barton, they might have their new Ryan Jensen.
I understand, but last year I should say missed, past tense. They missed Ryan Jensen deeply, and anybody would. Very talented player. No longer with him. Like, yeah, that's a huge hole to fill, but they didn't fill it last year.
So they kind of had to build an offense around that, right? Like how do we navigate this? How do we figure this out? We can't just magically make our left guard and center better overnight, right? And so that was on, Dave Canales and Idzik and Goodwin and all these guys. Like how do we just make this work? And so what they did was they looked at, okay, what are our receivers good at? What is Baker good at? Let's just lean extra hard into that.
Yes.
And a lot of it was throwing to Baker's right, because Baker's just more accurate when thrown to the right and thrown to the left. And it's different footwork when you're throwing to the right versus throwing to the left. So I get it. Like some guys are, steal a reference from Zoolander, like ambi-turners, like Zoolander couldn't turn left. Like,
oh my God.
Some guys aren't that. Like some guys just can't turn left and throw. And
I'm
Baker,
sorry. I have PTSD about this particular statistic because of
Trubisky.
Miss Trubisky and can't throw left, which wasn't really true, but it became a narrative and nobody would lay off it.
It was kind of true of Baker, like not gonna lie. And when we did the Panthers episode, we talked about this. Like they built an offense out of Baker throwing to his right
and throwing outs,
and it worked.
Yep.
Right. Like all 3 of their top receivers, Evans, Godwin, Trey, like literally their most caught route was out routes.
Yep.
He had the 4th highest average depth of target in the entire league at 9.4, but they were 21st in go routes. Like they stretched the field, but they stretched the field on out-breaking routes.
Yeah.
And on deep crosses where he's hitting like the second or third window on them, and on over routes and everything like that. Like that was what they built their passing game out of. We are calling flood all day, every day, dude. Better hit this shit. And he did it. Like to Baker's credit, he did it.
Right, correct. When an offensive coaching staff sets the table, we talked about this a little bit with some of the other team previews. If you go back and look at them, like especially with the Texans, right? Bobby Slowick set a very particular table, especially in the first half of the season for CJ Stroud. But he also put that on Stroud's plate and said, when I give you this opening, I'm doing all this stuff to create this opening. When I create this opening, you got to hit it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'll do my part, you do your part. And the Canales, Baker, Mayfield sort of mind meld I referred to earlier was the same way. Like, I'll do stuff you like. If I do stuff you like, you pay it off. And he did.
Can't fault him for that.
Nope.
Won the damn division.
That's good coaching.
In terms of their run game, which was not good, again, that was more a function of just lack of interior talent than, Malk is very talented. Lack of talent at center and left guard.
And interior execution, because your offensive line is only as strong as your weakest link. And even as a sort of, they talk about offensive line as units within units, or groups within groups. And the interior group did not play as well as a tackle. You can't really separate that, right? As an offensive line, you have to play as 5 or 6 if you've got extra protection. You all have to be on the same page. And if somebody's not doing their job, both guys on either side have to shade and kind of go, oh, I got to do a job and a half because I know that's not going to hold up. It doesn't work.
Yeah, Tristan Wirfs can't just do everything by himself.
No.
As good as he is, right?
Can he catch passes? I think he can.
He's athletic enough. He probably could.
Let's go. Put him at tight.
Why can't we do like a J.J. Watt thing with Tristan Wirfs where like he's a red zone target?
That'd be fun.
But when designing a run game around that, right?
Difficult.
There's only so much you can do. Like they were a pretty heavy outside zone team when they were under center. It was 43% outside zone when Baker was under
Run
center.
Run away.
pretty freaking high. Yeah. and they kind of did that honestly because that puts less of a focus on like vertical displacement on the interior trio, like on inside zone, which is like you better get movement. On outside zone, it's like if they cross your face, fine, just wall them off. The back will cut off of that. So it's a little bit more forgiving for that. With the one exception being center. If you have a center who's like really shitty, then nothing's going to work. But again, that was why they took Barton. That was why we thought they had a pretty high chance of taking either him or JPJ or whoever because they needed that. But they did the best they could. I think credit to them for still committing to the run, even when they knew it probably wasn't going to work because they just kind of had to, right? It set up all their play action stuff. In a lot of ways, they do kind of remind me, you brought up Slowick earlier. They kind of remind me of what Houston did last year. Now, they weren't as good at it, but I would say philosophically, it's not that far off.
Yeah, the differences are harder to parse when you really sit down and look at the film. And again, it's good coaching, folks. Like we have obviously lauded Bobby Slowick on this podcast, Canales, one of our favorites, and we really like his potential to, I don't want to say resurrect because he didn't die, but bring Bryce back to what he was thought to be before he was drafted.
Bryce almost died several times last year.
He almost turned into a fine red mist after getting pasted behind that lack of an offensive line, but it's good coaching. We talk about adaptability, we talk about versatility, we talk about looking at who you have in the room and saying, what can we do? Not just what do we want to do or my way or the highway, or I've always done this at my previous stops. That's the best coaching in the NFL is looking at the room and saying, hey, what are you best at? Again, I'm going to line it up for you. You have to hit it. That's your responsibility as players. But it's my responsibility as a coach. If we line something up and it doesn't work 8 times out of 10, maybe we can change this. Either we're going to scratch it from the playbook or I'm going to come back and say, how can we adjust this? We need this in our playbook. How can we run it so that we have a better chance of hitting it? Because right now, and some coaches just won't. They're just stubborn.
Yeah, I would not describe the Tampa Bay, at least offensive coaches, as stubborn. Defensively, narrative shifts a little bit. I did feel like, especially halfway through the year, when they're so blitz heavy,
sure,
and it becomes so clear that that's not helping them whatsoever against the pass, and they still just kind of kept doing it. That's like my one criticism of this defensive coaching staff. I'm talking from head coach on down, where I'm like, guys, by week 9, it was pretty clear this shit wasn't working. And they were good run defense again, but part of that was because they were so blitz heavy. Actually, let me start from the beginning on this. I'll give you full context. So when you're looking at the coverage data, like what did they run the most? They were very cover 3 heavy. And in my mind, I was like, oh, I didn't think that. Like when watching them on tape, I didn't think they were super cover 3 heavy. And then I realized like, oh, cover 3, like if they're running a bunch of 3-3 fire zones, that gets charted as cover 3 because it's 3 deep, 3 under. Like, let me actually go look at their blitz data. Let me see how many fire zones they called compared to like actual cover 3. That's where you see the meat of this defense. Like they called fire zones all the time. They had the 3rd highest blitz rate in the entire NFL. 44% overall, 49% specifically against the pass. They had the 2nd highest blitz rate against the run. Like I'm talking early down blitz rate. It was fire zone, fire zone, fire zone. Kind of reminds me of what Mike McDonald was doing with the Ravens, where they called tons of fire zones in rundown situations because they use fire zones like as a way to get, free runners in the backfield to stop the run. The Bucs really believed in that a lot as well. They also had the 4th highest stunt percentage, which you don't normally see for a team that is also very high in blitz percentage, but they did both at the same time, which again, abnormal. They were 12th in terms of their simulated pressure rate. Their linebackers were just going forward all the time, right? And that contributed heavily to why their run defense was so good, because they were just aggressive and attacking and attacking and attacking. But by mid-season, it became clear to me that their pass defense was being very adversely affected by this, in the sense that when they're playing these 3 deep, 3 under zones, like they're not playing super tight coverage on it. It's more loose zone coverage.
Right.
We're going to rally and tackle. Either we get home or we don't, right? And they kind of ran into issues with that because, hold on, I have the actual numbers here. So they were super high in blitz rate, right? But they were 20th in pressure rate at 34.7%. That was pretty low if we're just looking at pure pressure rates, right? They faced the 5th most dropbacks of 6 in protection in the entire NFL. So it became very clear early on to offenses of like, oh, they're just going to call fire zones whenever. Like, let's just leave 6 in protection, whether it's a running back or a tight end or a fullback or whoever. And we'll just handle it.
Yeah.
Because if they're going to play all these loose, 3 deep, 3 under behind it, we know we're going to have space.
Yeah, and we'll hit hot.
We just got to block it up.
For sure.
And they got blocked up. Again, their pressure rate was not very high despite them blitzing so much. Yeah. So if you're calling all these fire zones and they're getting blocked because you're facing a lot of 6-man protections, you're not facing a lot of 5-man protections, all of a sudden you're kind of screwed, right? They gave up a lot of explosive plays. They had a very low contest rate in terms of in the secondary. They had only an 8% rate of forced incompletions on targets, which is super low.
Especially for them, because they play such a physical man press style. I mean,
at least they used to.
That's the Bucs hallmark, right? And to have a contested rate that's under 10% is like, so that's not working for you.
They just really changed what they did last year. Like, it wasn't as much pure man coverage. It was a lot of that, okay, we're going to sit back, we're going to rally and tackle, and if we get the TFL, great. If we get the sack, great. If they block it up, all right, again, we'll just tackle.
We'll give it. Yep.
And that philosophy kind of lent itself really well to being a red zone defense. They were 3rd in terms of red zone efficiency of just like stopping you from scoring touchdowns. But they let you get there a lot, right? They let you march down the field a lot. So even though they were good in the red zone, the fact that it was so easy to at least get into field goal range against them because they were so blitz happy and everybody knew they were blitz happy and they blocked it up really well, that I think was my biggest criticism of them. Was halfway through the year, at least to me, it became clear that this was a problem, and they're just kind of thinking, let's keep doing it. Let's see if it works.
Reminds me stylistically a little bit of Brian Flores. Like, I will blitz out of any formation at any time. Be warned. And everybody is already warned. They don't need any tape to know that Brian Flores is going to come after the quarterback whenever. And so they hold the extra person in and they say, great, but if we get that, you're playing loose zone coverage and we're going to take our chunks. And it's not going to be that hard to progress to the red zone. And then we'll see where the chips fall. And that's cool until it's like known by both sides. And then somebody's got to throw a changeup. And the Bucs just kind of went, no, we'll just keep doing it.
Whereas Flores, in the back half of last year, ran more drop 8 than anybody else, right? He would show blitz drop 8.
Right.
And it was very effective for them because you still had to respect it.
Yeah.
Like, as an offensive coordinator,
you
like, still have to respect it.
Is he really not?
Dude,
is he really not blitzing?
If you get a double mug look and you don't keep your running back in, like, you're just going to get fired. Yeah. Like, you have to do it, right? Yeah. And so Flores knew that, and so he would show it and then back off. All of a sudden, you got 3 receivers against 8 coverage defenders.
He's just laughing behind his play card.
100%. Like, that was why the Vikings defense, despite talent deficiencies in multiple spots, were, like, honestly punching way above their weight talent-wise.
He reinvented himself mid-season. One of the most interesting things. I realize this is not a Vikings episode, but stylistically, if the Bucs had pulled a changeup mid-season, they too could have had a different result. Certainly in pass defense. Again, their run defense was spectacular, but it was because they were just flooding all the lanes with guys.
Yeah, again, they blitzed their way to success. Live by the sword, die by the sword. Like, that's Todd Bowles in a nutshell. Mm-hmm. Oddly enough, the one time where they really went on a run and won the Super Bowl. I understand Tom Brady had a big thing to do with that, but
Oh, you think?
they kind of moved away from that, right? When in the rematch against the Chiefs, it was all about like, we're going to sit back, we're going to play quarters, we're going to win with 4 because we trust our guys to win. And obviously they had very good pass rushers that year, but the one time Bulls eased off the gas, he won the Super Bowl. Like, I don't know, Todd, maybe learn from that a little bit, please.
It's always tough. Things change dynamically in the NFL all the time. Like we just talked about mid-season changes. So I think it's a legit criticism to say, hey, in the first half of the year, it was working enough, and then everybody figured it out and adjusted, which everybody does in the NFL, and they didn't have a counterpunch.
Well, it's probably a good transition to talking about this coaching staff as a whole. We've said a bunch of their names, but why don't we run through top to bottom, front office, coaches, assistants. Let's talk about who's actually calling the shots here.
Yeah, I want to talk about GM Jason Light for a second because I think one of the most underappreciated GMs in the NFL. Everybody says, oh, he won a Super Bowl because of Brady. Well, he did get Brady in the building, but there was also a strong supporting cast around him and continues to do that work. Like, is not a GM in my mind that is sort of resting on former laurels, continually trying to build this roster in a way that suits the coaching staff, does that in a very, I think, effective way, has a better hit rate than most GMs do in terms of the draft. Just want to give Jason Light his flowers because he deserves them. Head coach Todd Bowles, year 2 as head coach, but he's been with the Bucs for a while because he was on Bruce Arians' staff. He was the handpicked successor. Here's the one I'm going to go in on. Offensive coordinator, Liam Cohen.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of Bucs fans are feeling very anxious because Canales was the quarterback whisperer. He created this success with Baker. The Bucs overachieved because of it, and now he's gone. Now what? Now enter Liam Cohen. Liam Cohen is the guy that was working with the Rams when Baker Mayfield played basically a rough half season with them, got off the plane and won a game in the same week for a different team. And postseason, somebody said, how did that happen? I think it was our buddy Jordan Rodriguez who was interviewing Baker and said, what was the difference? And he said, they made it fun again. It's been a long time since football's been fun for me. They made it fun, and that showed on the field. The guy that was in charge of that offensive staff was Liam Cohen. So everybody thinking there's going to be this huge drop-off with Canales leaving, which is a very natural thought given his success in Tampa, his success before that in Seattle. You're thinking there's going to be negative regression here. Oh, man, they can't possibly. I'm here to say I think they can possibly. And they handpicked the best possible guy, somebody that Baker's already worked with. He already knows all the verbiage. He's super comfortable with it. He said it made football fun again. This is literally the best, one of the best coaching polls in this entire series.
And I guarantee you they asked Baker like to give some input on who you want.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you he said Liam Cohen.
Yeah, if you can get that guy, we're not going to skip a beat. And Jason Light and Todd Bowles look at each other and go, well, that sounds pretty good. We'd like to not leave this plateau we've achieved. Boom. Liam Cohen, I think he's one of the biggest reasons the Bucs may hold all their offensive success from last year, despite the national media thinking, well, Dave Canales is gone. They've got to regress, right? I'm not so sure. I'd say hold that thought. Co-defensive coordinators on this staff, which they had last year as well. Casey Rogers is the defensive run game coordinator and defensive line coach. Larry Foote, former Steeler, defensive pass game coordinator and inside linebacker coach. And then Thomas McGahee is the special teams coach. In terms of notable coaches on offense, we got to start with Tom Moore. Again, if you've watched this series previously, this is a tag that's being applied to more and more highly experienced veteran coaches. He is the senior offensive assistant, which means, Tom, do whatever the hell you want because you've seen it all. Moore was recognized in 2023 by the Pro Football Hall of Fame with an award of excellence for his contributions as an assistant coach in the league for over 4 decades, 40 years of coaching experience. Started coaching 1961.
There were kids that were born when Tom Moore started coaching at Iowa that were in first grade when we landed on the moon.
Yep.
And Moore was already well established as a coach at that point. All right. He predates mankind being on the fucking moon.
Yep.
As a football coach. What the hell?
So if you think he hasn't seen it, done it, been there, been around that block, you're wrong. Tom Moore's seen more and knows more about football than we will ever learn. This is the coach largely responsible for Peyton Manning's success. He also worked with Brady the year he won the Super Bowl in Tampa Bay. Tom Moore's the dude.
He might have worked with the guy who invented the damn sport. He's been around so long. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, can't start without Tom Moore. Josh Grizzard, the pass game coordinator, and Thaddeus Lewis is the quarterback coach. This is the duo. Yes, that Thaddeus Lewis.
I looked at that and I was like, that has to be the same
It
Thad
is
Lewis, right?
How many Thaddeus Lewises are
There's
there?
like 4 of them on the planet.
Yeah. No, this is the duo that will do a lot of the heavy lifting to keep Baker on a positive track. The same one he was on with Canales. Liam Cohen obviously going to be coordinating the overall offense, but these two guys, Grizzard and Lewis, are going to be in the day-to-day, in the room with Baker and the other quarterbacks saying this is how the execution should go. Grizzard brings 7 years of NFL coaching experience with him, all with the Dolphins. He's been an offensive quality control coach and a wide receivers coach in that time. Lewis has been the Bucs' assistant wide receiver coach for the past 2 seasons, so he's staying with the organization. Also spent time at UCLA with Chip Kelly, was a 4-year starter, QB at Duke, if you remember the name from the draft. That's where it was. Spent parts of 8 seasons in the NFL. Well-traveled, has seen a lot of different coaching philosophies, a lot of different offensive systems, absorbed them all. That's all going to help him in his work with the Bucs. And then Kevin Carberry, the offensive line coach. This is the guy that there is a lot of pressure on. Longtime offensive line coach for the Bucs, left, went to the Panthers. Now it's Kevin Carberry's job to take that offensive line, fix the interior. Big shoes to fill. Joe Gilbert is the one that went to Carolina. Joe Gilbert has worked with some great offensive line talent, including when Brady won the Super Bowl. Carberry was the Saints offensive line assistant coach last year and the OL coach with the Rams in the prior 2 seasons, which means he worked with Cohen.
Yeah.
So you've got that handshake and familiarity. And that was the year the Rams won the Super Bowl. Carberry was working with the Rams at that time. So again, thinking, oh no, we lost Gilbert. We can't possibly be as good on the offensive line. Maybe not as good, but I'm not predicting a huge drop off here.
Also, let's be honest. There's really not a whole lot of room to go down when looking at the interior group last year. Tackles played spectacularly well.
Sure.
The interior, a little bit of room for improvement there.
A little bit of room. On the defense and special teams side, really only one coach I'm going to highlight. Kevin Ross, the cornerbacks coach, has been in that role for the last 5 seasons, played 14 years in the NFL as a cornerback himself. And let's be honest, cornerback play for the Bucs has been a strong suit for a long time. Kevin Ross is a large part of that.
It's a strong staff, especially considering what they lost. Like those were some pretty big shoes to fill, like top to bottom on the offensive staff, and they filled them very well. And I don't think you can go wrong at this point with just hiring anybody who's ever been in the room with Sean McVay. That tends to go well for people. Yep. So, yeah, good hires. So given all that information, and given the fact that this is a team that I think a lot of people don't pay attention to as much as they should on a national scale, right? That brings us to our underdog top 3. And this segment, the entire purpose of it is to identify values. Because I'm sure a lot of you watching this are doing so because you're preparing for your fantasy leagues. You're trying to figure out what you're going to do this season. You're trying to figure out, okay, what can I get in the back half of the draft that's going to serve me well? Tampa is one of those teams where everything's at a discount. And I think it's because they lost Canales. I think it's because people don't respect Baker as much as a quarterback, right? And so they're playing it pretty conservatively in terms of where they take Bucs players, right? So that's why he's going as QB 22, which to me is a little bit too low. I'm not saying he's going to finish as a top 12, but I would say higher than 22, like somewhere in the mid to late teens, like he finished last year, is probably more appropriate. So you're getting a slight discount on the quarterback, which is a good indicator of the type of discounts you're getting elsewhere. Rachaad White is going as RB 14. Dude, They ran that guy through a broken glass factory last year. What makes you think they're not going to do it again? Like, he got so much production with such a bad interior offensive line last year, and they've made significant improvements, or at least in my opinion, significant strides on the interior line this year. RB14 is too low for Rachaad White, and I know EJ agrees with that because we both loved him coming out in the draft. And then Chris Godwin. This one I don't understand at all. Wide receiver 38?
It's a recency bias. It just has to be. Like, if you're looking at the quality of player, I understand injuries, I understand lack of production, but given a quote-unquote down last year, and he was better than the rating he's at this year in terms of ADP, it's like, what do you think got worse?
It's Chris Godwin.
They have more protection. Again, we've just outlined the case that their offensive staff is not going to be a significant drop-off, if at all. Why is he worse than he was last year? He's not that old. Going back to Rachaad White, like, we talked about all the problems with their offensive line, how terrible the interior of the offensive line was, how much they were forced into running outside zone, and don't think that defenses didn't know that they had to do that and then keyed off on it. Despite that, Rachaad White, 1,539 yards from scrimmage last year and 9 TDs. Despite all the problems we're talking about with the run game.
Do you think it's going to go down?
Like,
come on.
That guy was doing everything and getting almost no attention for it. So White's a huge value. Godwin is just more of a head scratcher. Baker, I get it, but I'm telling you, don't listen to people who say, well, no Canales, Baker's fallen off the planet. Like, forget it. He's not worth taking. I really don't believe that with the arrival of Cohen.
It's like the anti-Falcons where, you know, everybody on the Falcons offense, at least the ones that we care about the most, are like going in the top 10 of their respective positions.
Yeah.
In Bijan's case, he's player 7 overall. In Tampa, you're getting everybody super late.
Right. If you want a Falcons player and you miss out on them, pivot to a Bucs player.
I promise you're going to get a better value.
Yeah.
And that's what this segment is about. It's about getting values. So by the time you watch this again, these ADPs may have changed. So I encourage you to go to Underdog Fantasy to see what they're at right now. Very possible that halfway through preseason, when all of a sudden everything looks the same, these values climb pretty significantly. But if you're drafting right now, it's a pretty good time to draft Bucs players. Again, you can find Underdog Fantasy at the link in the description below or at the QR code on the screen. So, EJ, with that being said, let's get to March.
Yeah, we'll talk about free agency losses. And the only one that really moved the needle for me in terms of tenure with the Bucs and impact that he had while he was there was Carlton Davis. So Carlton Davis in a trade moves to the Lions. Carlton Davis has been a fixture at corner for them. They have relied on him to beat the living hell out of opposing wide receivers. So they will have to replace that. Aaron Stinney, the left guard, moves on. Devin White, the linebacker, moves on. He did play close to 80% of the snaps, but Bucs fans, I'll just let you have your discourse in the comments about Devin White.
Part of me wonders if their blitz rate was so high because they're like, we cannot let Devin cover anybody. Send that dude forward. No other directions. He is only going forward.
Yeah, light the fuse and let him go. Ryan Neal is a safety. He played 51% of the snaps for them. Again, doesn't feel like a tremendous loss. Out of the entire list of players that we'll have on the screen, in terms of true losses, it really feels like Carlton Davis and a bunch of other guys.
I've never been a huge Devin White guy. Well, I was a Devin White guy as a prospect, and then, you know, seeing how he was developing in the NFL, like, kind of quickly fell off that wagon. I was like, yeah, I don't know about this. Like, even in their Super Bowl year, I thought Levante was still their best linebacker by far. I've always thought that.
And that's not even a question.
It's still true.
Levante
right?
David was their best linebacker, still is.
So I'm not super surprised that they let him walk out the door.
Nope.
He's always been very physically talented. He just never became the complete player that I thought he could have been. But hey, you know, they got a Super Bowl out of it. He was a very good pass rusher as a linebacker. It's not like it was a complete loss. He just wasn't. He just didn't live up to it. Carlton Davis is just tough to replace. I'm not saying he's an elite corner or a great corner even, but he's a solid starting corner, and those are harder to replace than you think, especially for a defense that at times demands a lot of their corners. So it's not the most crucial losses out of any of these teams that we do in this series, but I'm not going to pretend like everything's sunshine and rainbows. Like it is tough to replace some of these guys.
Sure.
In terms of who they retained, Antoine Winfield Jr. became the highest paid safety in the league, as he should. 100% warranted, 100% deserved. Honestly, for what he does for them and the quality of player he is, that's a discount. I know he's the highest paid safety. I don't care. Like, that's a discount for what he does for them. He is so freaking good. Antoine Winfield is spectacular. Really happy they locked him up long term. Baker, again, for what the top of the quarterback market is right now, which is at like 54, 55 million a year, getting him at 33.3, totally acceptable. Absolutely okay with that. Greg Gaines, we love ourselves some Greg Gaines. He signed at a very reasonable $3.5 million to be a rotational defensive lineman for them. The ageless Levante David, still their best linebacker. Like we said, $8.5 million. He's probably going to play till he's 40 at this point. He refuses to get worse ever.
It's like a Terminator.
Dude, I can't believe he's still this good.
Every year. Underrated. Been saying that for the last, 8 years? Like, people will start their top inside linebacker list, and they'll get to like 10 and not mention David, and I'm like, stop.
You know what really pissed me off the most is in like the prime Kuechly, Bobby Wagner era, the discussion was always like, oh, who's better, Luke Kuechly, Bobby Wagner? I was always that annoying nerd in the corner being like, also Levante. Like, I'm not saying you have to say he's number one, but can we at least say the damn name?
Yeah, and if you're not talking about him in the top 5, especially in that era, it was like, what are you doing? If you're not talking about him in the top 10 right now, I'm still like, sorry, man, what are you doing? I know he's not a spring chicken, but look at the way he plays on the field. Look at the results. He is a tremendous player. I'm really glad that he gets to stay in Tampa Bay.
Dude, prime Levante was a super weapon. That's one of the best linebackers I've ever seen.
Yeah, wildly underrated.
And he's one of those guys where when people compare draft prospects to him, I'm like, don't you dare.
Please stop.
Don't do that.
That's a lot to put on a rookie. Let's be fair.
Anytime you say, oh, he reminds me of Levante David, I'm like, don't do that. Don't do that. Mike Evans, speaking of guys who you really shouldn't compare people to.
Future Hall of Famer Mike Evans, period, done, end of story.
Here's the thing. Yes, Hall of Famer. I think we've evolved beyond that question. Like, yes, Ring of Honor.
Some people
yes,
have.
Hall of Fame. Here's my question.
Sure.
Is he first ballot?
I don't tend to get into the first ballot thing because first ballot is so fickle. There are more players in the league. They haven't upped the number of players going in quite some time. And there are just more players in the league. So now it's an even more selective criteria. So first ballot becomes this, well, we didn't pick a guard for the last 3 years, so now we need a guard. We need to balance it out. Like, there are more receivers. The league's passing folks. I get all that. Like, Mike Evans, 1,000+ yards every year, period, end of story. Like,
was it 10 straight years to start his career or something like that?
He's 31. Guess what he's going to get this year? 1,000 yards. Like, you just... When you look at the consistency, the physical dominance, whatever else, again, you'll get 15, people, oh, this is why I hate top lists, but people get into like, oh, top 15 wide receivers in the NFL, and they're like, they get past 15, and they're like, no, Mike Evans. And I'm like, dude, 1,000 yards every year for the past decade, like ever, always, every year he's been in the league. Hello? And they're like, well, yeah, but, whatever.
There's never a good reason.
He's not flashy. And you're like, Mike Evans, future Hall of Famer, first ballot or not, don't care. Got to get that guy in the Hall. He deserves it. He is a tremendous football player.
Yeah. One of my favorite receivers of his generation. Also, one of the most dominant receivers of his generation.
Still just racking it up, not talking about it.
I'd put him in the Hall just because he got Johnny Manziel drafted in the first round. Like, that's a Hall of Fame accomplishment by itself. In terms of third-party additions, they brought in Randy Gregory to bolster their edge rush rotation. Randy Gregory's 32 already? Wow.
Yeah, been around a bit.
I still remember him at Nebraska. Wow. Okay. Anyway, so he got brought in at $3 million a year. Ben Bredesen got brought in at left guard for $3 million a year. Not a cheap deal. I'm not even saying he's a great player, but I think he's still probably gonna be more serviceable than last year.
Yeah, let's just say he was needed.
He was needed. Bryce Hall, cornerback from the Jets, an EJ Snyder special.
Sorry, this is purely me highlighting Bryce Hall because I'm a Bryce Hall truther, and I think he fits really well in the system, like physically as a player. What Tampa Bay asked their corners to do, Bryce Hall can do when healthy. It's a caveat, but large, physical corner, likes to play press. Like, I hope this is a career boosting move for Bryce Hall. I think it was a fine choice by him and his agent. I'm hoping that he delivers on that because, boy, go back to like Bryce Hall college tape and look at him just
very talented,
physically dominating guys. And you're like, that's what Tampa Bay asked their corners to do. So I hope it's a match between player that, again, like Baker, that has not seen the heights we think he could consistently. Maybe this is the stop.
He'll be competing for that dime spot.
For sure.
Tavir Thomas, who they also brought in, will also be competing for that dime spot.
Another great ad.
He might even compete for the nickel spot, but to be honest, like, Izien was so good there that it's going to be tough for me to think anybody's going to uproot him from that nickel spot anytime soon. So if anything, Thomas and Hall are going to be competing for the dime corner spot. They're very different body types. They're different skill sets. So it just kind of comes down to what they want there. And then Jordan Whitehead, the return
coming home
of Jordan Whitehead to the Buccaneers. If you need a receiver to be absolutely terrified of going over the middle, you sign Jordan Whitehead. That's for damn sure.
No, I'm glad to see he's back. He played very well before he left. I was a big fan of the Jets when they signed him. I thought this is a very underrated signing. I think he delivered on that. It wasn't that he played below his deal and is slinking back to Tampa Bay. He played well on his deal in the Jets. And whenever you see a player return to his previous team, I think that's a strong endorsement of, we liked you when you were here. We had to let you go at a certain time. You're still playing well. Why don't you come on home and play for us again? We'd be happy to have that.
And then one last signing. This one actually happened today. We're recording this on June 6th, which is when Sterling Shepard rejoining his former college quarterback in Baker Mayfield. They played together at OU in 2015, nearly a decade ago.
For all the Sooners out there, this is the one.
Oh, my dad is stoked, by the way. He loves Baker. He loves Sterling Shepard. And again, I've watched almost every OU game since
forever
97, right, when I was old enough to like start paying attention to football. So Sterling Shepard holds a special place in my heart, as well as Baker Mayfield. Great to see them together. Our friend Keegan Renault, who he's an OU Keegan. Guy. I'm sure Keegan's watching this because he'll watch anything Baker Mayfield related. All the OU fans, all the OU OGs are just
Stacey Dales, like.
That's right. She's Oklahoma too.
She's a Sooner as well. So
Oklahoma legend. I think actually her jersey's in the rafters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I love Stacey. She's great. Which, by the way, I used to work with Stacey at NFL Network. Kindest human being ever. Love Stacey Dales.
And incredibly hardworking. I spent half a day at the combine on the field about 35 feet away from where the NFL, network folks, producers, camera people, Stacey, were all working, constantly working. All that sort of off-the-cuff stuff that she's delivering from the field at the combine, the player interviews, the one with Terry and Arnold that went viral. Like, she is constantly working, setting, communicating with her team, researching, head down. And we're talking like 14, 15-hour day straight. No stopping, no food, just head down, running to different parts of the field, catching players, acting as if it's the most natural thing in the world. Just such a hard worker.
She's your favorite reporter's favorite reporter. Guarantee you that. Yeah. And also a hell of a basketball player in her youth. All right, let's get to April. Moving on from March. Again, they had a very solid free agency period, added some talent, retained some talent, shed some bad contracts. Now we get into the draft where they, if nothing else, fixed by far the biggest need on the team.
You could have quit after the first round. You were just like, done. Okay, sweet.
If all they got was Graham Barton, I would have said, cool, success. We're good here.
100%. So Graham Barton, the aforementioned Graham Barton, center. Now, we list him as a center. He played a lot of tackle at Duke as well. His pro projection was center by most analysts. They get him 26th pick in the first round, will bring them flexibility. He could play anywhere on that interior offensive line. Will most likely play center for them. Second round, pick 57, the edge out of Alabama. Very athletically talented. Chris Braswell, a little underrated, a little overdrafted, I think, but they like his style. I get that. And then one of my all-time favorite players and picks and fits in this draft, all three. Tyke Smith. They list him as a safety out of Georgia. They get him in the third round at 89th overall pick. Folks, this is a slot corner. This is a straight up slot corner.
It's going to be the first all nickel secondary. It's like 4 of them.
He played like 87% of his snaps at Georgia in the slot. Like, you can call him a safety if you want to. This is a slot corner, and he is a freaking dog. And I don't just mean that because he went to Georgia. Like, this kid grew up in Philly. He is tough as nails. Great going forward in terms of making tackles against the run and being part of the run fit. Blitzer, absolutely smothering of receivers. Super physical on every route. Never gives up on anything. Love me some Tyke Smith. Perfectly fits what the Bucs want their corners to do.
Let me ask you this, though. Because Christian Izien was so good last year, and we love Antoine, and we love Jordan, where does he play?
I would play all 4 of those guys.
At the same time?
Yep.
Screw it. We're running dime.
100%.
We got Vita Vea.
Because
fuck you. We're running dime.
Right, but you're not giving up anything in the run fifth with a guy like Tyke Smith or Christian Izien. Like, those guys can tackle. They're physical. Like,
New England did it. New England played dime a lot.
We have an example of how this would work. So my answer is I don't care. Get this kid on the field. Tremendous football player. And then they go right back to back. This is back-to-back EJ picks. Jalen McMillan, wide receiver out of Washington. Again, third round, just a few picks later at 92. I think Jalen McMillan is highly underrated. Comes into a situation where he doesn't need to start right away because of Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, but he can learn from them. I think he's a long-term contributor. I think he's wildly underrated. Getting him way down near the bottom of the top 100, I think, is a value. I would have picked him anytime after about pick 60. Really good shot. And then Bucky Irving, one of our favorite players to disagree about in the lead up to the draft.
Well, once you're in the 4th round, it's
palatable to you.
I'm not saying it's still what I would have done, but it's less consequential, right? Once you're in the 4th round, it's like, okay, let's take Bucky Irving. Fine.
As you can tell, Brett's not a huge Bucky Irving guy. I really like him.
Bucky Irving's not a huge guy.
That's true. Running back out of Oregon, 125th pick overall. Great at breaking tackles. Extremely physical player despite his size. Super tough. Vocal leader. Was at his pro day at Oregon. Really enjoy what I think he's going to bring. And to me, Bucky Irving is one of those guys that you look at all the measurables, you look at everything else, and you say, this is a guy that's greater than the sum of his parts, right? Greater than the sum of what you would look at on paper and say he is. I think he's more than that. It's a really good pick by the Bucs. Elijah Klein, the guard out of UTEP. They skip down to the 6th round, 220th overall. And then Devin Culp. This is a steal, in my opinion. Boy, the Bucs love them some UW tight ends, and I can't fault them for that.
You can't quit them.
Yep. 7th round, pick 246. Fast, fluid, more of a straight pass catcher than their other UW tight end, Cade Otton, who has some blocking in his game. Devin Culp is an underrated sort of 4th, 5th wide receiver option. Yes, he plays the tight end spot, but so smooth, catches the ball so naturally. Blocks a little bit as well. That's the sneaky side of his game. Not what you're bringing him in for primarily. To get him in the 7th round, I thought it was a complete coup. This is a great job. Again, when I say that Jason Light is one of the more underrated GMs in the NFL, this is what I'm talking about. Top to bottom, there's like 2 picks where I'm like, the Braswell pick was a little bit early for me. The Elijah Klein pick could have gone one way or another, but we're talking about a 6th round guard at that point. And to me, the 7th round pick of Devin Culp more than offsets that. Great job by Light and his staff.
It's very rare that anybody actually fulfills the trope of like, oh, he's going to play for this team for 10 years. Very rarely.
Extremely rare.
Barton might be the exception. Barton might be the one that actually does play for this team for 10 years. He was one of the safest players at any position in the entire draft. He's one of the guys you feel best about of as a rookie, he will immediately belong. He will immediately look like a solid NFL player as a rookie. That is not common.
Nope.
Every team hopes they get like one or two guys a year max that look like they can at least get snaps, let alone being an average starter, let alone above average starter. He might be a good starter as a rookie, not a common thing. I would say Braswell, considering they haven't gotten as much out of Joe Tryon-Shoyinka as they wanted to so far, I get it. He went at the top end of the range that I thought he would go. I thought he could have gone a little bit later than that, but not so much where I'm like, that's early. Like, I'm not reacting to that the same way I react to Bucky Irving, where I'm like, that's full round. Like, he probably went like 10 to 15 picks before I thought he would, but that's still in the range, right? It makes sense to me. McMillan, I'm fascinated to see what they do with him, right? Because they already got Evans, they already got Godwin, they already got Palmer, they brought in Sterling Shepard. Like, I don't know where he's going to play yet, but I know he's going to play. I know he's going to get on the field. Also, one more note about him. I said earlier, it's not fair to compare people to Levante David coming out of the draft. It's not fair to compare people to Mike Evans coming out of the draft. I'm not comparing McMillan, at least Jalen McMillan, to Mike Evans. His little brother, though, oh, baby. You look at his little brother in Arizona. Holy shit. That might be Mike Evans. Again, first time in like 10 years I could say that.
We'll see.
Dude.
Different player, but definitely.
He's so good.
He's really good. I've already put out a couple of tweets about him. There was the hope that when Jed Fish moved from Arizona to Washington to replace Kalen, that he would bring McMillan with him and the quarterback. They really hoped they were going to just bring that, just import passing combination X. Didn't happen. They stay at Arizona. Doesn't matter. Wildly talented player. But Jalen in his own right, again, it is difficult to find fit for him given the talent. It's a strong receiving core, but I really think he's going to get a lot of the snaps that Trey got when he was a rookie.
I could see that.
Like, that's where I think he sort of breaks in and either makes his mark or doesn't. Has a lot of similarities to Trey as a player. I think he's better overall. I had a higher grade on McMillan than I did on Trey, but I think that's where he kind of like wheedles his way in and gets his way onto the field and hopefully makes his mark. In
terms of their UDFA haul past the draft, this is another one of those UDFA classes that was very extensive. A lot of names coming in. A lot of roster churn expected for this team, not because they weren't talented, but just because that's just how they run things. Mm-hmm. They bring in a lot of UDFAs every single year, and they try to mine that resource as much as they possibly can. Judge Culpepper, first one I want to bring up, interior defensive lineman out of Toledo, son of former Buccaneer Brad Culpepper. If you're a 90s Bucs fan, actually probably teammate of Mike Allstott, now that I think about it, for like 5 or 6 years. So his son Judge is going to be coming into camp fighting for a roster spot, or at least probably a practice squad spot, I would say. Kalen DeLoach, linebacker out of Florida State, another lighter type of linebacker, like a hybrid safety linebacker type. I don't know if he'll stick on the 53, but he could be a practice squad guy for them. And then Rashad Wisdom, all name team for sure. Another DB out of UTSA. Every single year they put out a couple. What made you put Rashad Wisdom on this list?
We saw him live a couple of years ago versus Texas. Very talented.
We did. You're right. Yeah, we did.
Very talented. Great range. I thought he definitely had a draftable grade. Would have been a low round pick, but again, for the Bucs to come along and pick up the dollars that other teams dropped and say, hey, you didn't get picked for whatever reason. Not a talentless player by any stretch, a very talented secondary player. Again, is looking to try and make a mark in a secondary that's loaded with players. Not exactly sure where he's going to fit or whether that's 53 or practice squad, but certainly talented enough to make the roster. We'll see if he does.
That brings us to our final segment, which is where we answer 2 questions at the end of every single episode. The second is, what's the ceiling and floor and wins? The first question is, did they get better? And we're talking about, did they get better since this time last year, right? Or rather, even since the end of the season. Mm-hmm. Like, are they in a better spot now than they were in, say, January? And we answer that with either a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or thumbs even. And thumbs even just represents, are they roughly the same based on all of their additions and subtractions together, right? I wrestled with this one quite a bit between thumbs up and thumbs even. And in the end, I went with thumbs even because, not because I don't like a lot of what they did in the offseason, but I went with thumbs even because I already consider them to be a good team.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's not a whole lot of room for them to go up from here. Like they're already kind of in that solid second tier of NFC teams where it's like, yes, they'll be in the playoffs. They might make the division round. The only real place they can go up from here is like legitimate top end Super Bowl contenders. I'm talking like Niners status, right? Like Lions status. I still don't put them in that range.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want to go thumbs up because I didn't want to elevate them into that next NFC tier quite yet. That doesn't mean I don't think they're a good team. They're still a good team. They were a good team last year. They're a good team this year. I think they got ever so slightly better. But I'm also factoring in like, yes, they did lose a lot of offensive staff. I think they did a good job replacing them, but I'm not about to get too freaky with it. Like I see them as a good team in 2023 and a good team in 2024. They're going to be in the dance. They're going to have a shot. I'm just not quite ready to put them into that Niners-Lions tier yet, so I'm going to go thumbs even. It's not a knock. In fact, it's a compliment. I think one more offseason of this, and I can bump them up.
Yeah, it's a thin slice argument. And again, you're saying they're already a good team. That's based on what they did last year, which they weren't supposed to achieve. For me, that's the gap. I'm going to go thumbs up. I think Baker's prepped to continue his solid course under Liam Cohen. I think, tales of his demise because of Dave Canales' departure are vastly overstated. The offensive line got a couple of talent injections it really needed after losses in recent years. I think Baker might be even better because of that with a reliable run game. Betting Todd Bowles is going to have that pass defense back to its previously solid levels. Little bit better injury luck, we hope, and some sneaky new talent adds with Whitehead coming back, Tyke Smith, Tavir Thomas, Bryce Hall. Again, all names that probably aren't moving the needle for people, maybe even in Tampa, but certainly outside Tampa. I'm betting that the alchemy works. So I'm going to say thumbs up, and I'm going to say they can take a step from where they were last year, which, again, most people thought they weren't even going to achieve 9 wins in a division, win last year. I'm going to say they're going to take a step up from that. To me, that means thumbs up.
That brings us to ceiling and floor. Ceiling and wins, floor and wins. I have a fairly broad range here, and it's more because of how thin they are at some key positions.
Sure.
And I'm not really factoring in like, if Baker Mayfield gets hurt, because if any team's quarterback gets hurt,
sure,
like obviously that's going to be a big factor.
The number one starter.
Right. I'm talking about thinness on the offensive line. They did some good work on it, but they're not deep.
Nope. If
anybody goes down, they're in trouble. And then I even look at like their edge rotation. Like Yaya Diaby had a great rookie year. But Shaq Barrett, at least prime Shaq Barrett, ain't walking through that door. Like If Yaya goes down, I think they're in trouble, right? If Cansey goes down, they're in trouble. Like it's a good top 22 in terms of their starting 11 on offense and defense.
Yep.
I just don't think they're insulated from injury at all. The one position group where I think they're deep is like that safety nickel-ish group where it's like, can you play safety? Can you play nickel? They have like 5 guys that, yes, right. So they're good there.
Yep.
Everywhere else on the team, they're a little bit thin. Well, receiver's another one. But again, that's 2 positions out of how many that I think they're okay with in terms of insulated from injury. Everything else is fairly sketchy. So if they stay healthy, I think they hit 11. If they don't stay healthy, I think they hit 7. So again, it's a very broad range. That is my ceiling. That is my floor. Things can either go really well and they win the division, or they start taking on water. Things go from bad to worse, and they probably miss the playoffs altogether. I like to think the more positive end of the spectrum is the more likely outcome, because I don't like to count on injuries, but I'm just acknowledging the reality that they're not built to sustain any.
No, they're not. Their roster's not deep enough. They do need that extra year of roster building to get that layer or level beneath their starters to make them more robust. Every team's looking for that. Not a ton of them have it. I'm going to go a game higher on both ends. I'm going to say ceiling is 12. I think they can continue this rise. We talk in these series about whether or not a team checked the boxes, which were their major sort of bugaboos, lackings, whatever last year. Bucs have done a good job of that as anyone in this entire series in terms of these are the things that really tripped you up last year. They've got to check in almost every box. I think their coaching drop-off is going to be not as much as folks are portending it might be. So I'm going to go 12 as their ceiling and 8 as their floor. Again, injuries could throw that sideways, but I'm with you. I'm leaning towards the top end of that spectrum. Means they're going to be in a dogfight with the Falcons for the division. Doesn't mean they're necessarily going to win it. If they get 12, I think they will. But even if they're at the top end of that range, if they get more wins than last year, 10 or 11, they could still be second in this division.
Unfortunately, we can't run from the question any longer.
Nope.
We've talked about every single NFC team or NFC South team this week, from Carolina all the way to Tampa. We have to pick a winner. So between Atlanta and Tampa, who I assume, just like me, is the two teams this comes down to, who are you picking for your NFC South champ for 2024 as of right now?
It's very hard for me not to pick the Bucs. I have a strong belief in the Bucs continuing their rise, but I'm going to go vote for change. I'm going to take Atlanta.
You know, I thought I had my answer ready.
Ha ha! I'm
back and forth. I'm back and forth.
I have flummoxed the Coleman.
So how about I do the biggest cop-out of all time?
No, don't do
I
that.
say they both make the playoffs, but Atlanta wins the division. Tampa's a 6 seed.
I think that's fine. I actually think that's fairly realistic, and I think it's a razor-thin margin. It could go either way.
And here's the thing. They're both going to have the same record. They're both going to have the exact same record. It's going to come down to tiebreakers. Atlanta wins it. Tampa's the 6. Depending on how it works out, we might get a Falcons-Bucs playoff game out of that, depending on where Atlanta's seated. And then we settle it in January, right?
We'll settle this in the playoffs. No, I think they're both going to be improved teams. I hope they're both going to be improved teams, not only for the fan bases, but because, again, it's going to make more fun football for us. If the Bucs regress wildly this year, that's no fun. They were the plucky underdogs that overachieved last year. You want to see them build on that. Atlanta, for the last couple of years, we've been saying, come on, they've got so much talent. They should be better than this. We want to see them be better than that. And we believe that they, too, have checked the boxes to make that happen. Let's see it happen. Let's see, two teams at full bore go at each other and try and pick wins off each other and take a division lead towards the end, down the stretch, even into the playoffs. That'd be amazing.
Just know this, as a Bucs fan, when you're watching their division games against Atlanta this year, basically a playoff game. All three of them, right? Because those two games are going to determine who wins the division. And those two games are probably going to determine who hosts the other one in January. And then we're probably going to get a rematch of those two teams in January. So
yeah. And watch the other division games as well, because if you think Canales and his staff, freshly imported from Tampa Bay, isn't going to be trying to pick wins off both of those teams and be the spoiler, you'd be dead wrong.
That's the thing, is whoever wins this division is going to be determined by who survives Carolina and New Orleans, right? It's going to come down to who has the better record out of the other NFC South division games, because I think these two teams split with each other.
Very possible.
So better beat Carolina. Every single one of these games is really important. Not that Carolina is going to be a world beater, but I don't think they're going to be nearly as bad as they were last year.
They're not going to be doormats either.
Yeah, or at least doormat adjacent. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Again, I apologize for my sacrilege of wearing a Saints hoodie for this episode. But if you want to get a Mike Allstott shirt for yourself,
I apologize for nothing. Just let's get that clear.
There's a bunch of Bucs gear on Homage, by the way. It's not just Mike Allstott celebrations. There's my shirt, which I have in the other room. It's like a classic throwback Bucs logo. They got creamsicle stuff. They have other NFL gear. They have NFL gear for every single team.
Windbreakers, hoodies, any kind of stuff.
Starter
Shorts,
jackets.
sweats.
Actually, the starter jackets might be sold out.
Yeah, possibly. Well, certainly the creamsicle ones are. But
the creamsicles were so good.
Yeah, check homage.com. They've been a tremendous partner. They've got us geared up for the entire series if people put them on. If you use the link down in the description.
I'm going to wear it for the streams this year.
I understand. If you use the link down in the description or the QR code on the screen, we get a cut of any purchase. Doesn't matter whether it's bootleg gear or not. We deeply appreciate it. It's a way to support the show and get fresh gear for your team for the season.
With that, I want to thank all of our patrons, especially in the executive producer tier, for helping to put this show on for many, many years at this point. We just finished our 5th draft season.
Correct.
Is that what it was, right?
Yep.
And this is, I think, is our 3rd or 4th off-season preview series.
Yep, 3rd.
So it's been a lot of content over the years. We could not have done it without any of our executive producers. So thank you to all of you guys. Thank you to Underdog for sponsoring today's show and this entire series. Onwards and upwards. We hit actually, what is the next division? Are we doing the North next?
No, we're doing the West.
We're doing the West. All right, AFC West. Up next, EJ's coming down to LA, so we'll talk about the Chargers when he comes down to LA. And all the other AFC West teams that I'm not sure if I'm allowed to acknowledge because I work with the Chargers. But anyway, we'll see you guys next week for the AFC West.